Picture this for a moment. You've spent decades cooking the way your mother taught you, the way that felt familiar and safe, reaching for the same bottle of oil on the counter without giving it a second thought. And yet, somewhere in that everyday routine, there might be a small habit working against one of the hardest working organs in your body. I want to talk with you today about something most of us never question: the oil sitting in our kitchen cabinet and what it might mean for kidney health as we move past 60. If you've ever wondered why your energy isn't quite what it used to be, why your doctor mentioned a number on a blood test you didn't quite understand, or why kidney health seems to become a bigger conversation as the years go by, stay with me. We're going to walk through this together, gently and honestly, so you can make sense of your own kitchen and your own body with a little more clarity. Let's start by understanding why this topic deserves our attention in the first place. The kidneys are two fist-sized organs working quietly in the background of your life, filtering waste, balancing fluids, regulating blood pressure, and keeping your blood chemistry in a delicate equilibrium. They do this work non-stop, every minute of every day, without ever asking for recognition. But here's something many people don't realize. Kidney function naturally declines with age. Even in healthy adults, the filtering capacity of the kidneys tends to decrease gradually after the age of 40, and that decline can accelerate when the kidneys are placed under additional stress. This doesn't mean decline is inevitable or that nothing can be done. It simply means that after 60, the kidneys often have less reserve capacity to absorb extra strain, whether that strain comes from high blood pressure, diabetes, dehydration, or yes, certain dietary habits that quietly accumulate over the years. This is where cooking oil enters the conversation, and it's a more nuanced story than headlines often suggest. Oil itself is not the enemy. Fat is essential for hormone production, for absorbing certain vitamins, for cell membrane health, and for simply making food satisfying to eat. The concern isn't about oil as a category, it's about how certain oils are processed, how they're used in the kitchen, and how repeated exposure to those patterns can add a small but steady burden to a system that's already working with less margin than it used to have. Many people misunderstand this issue in one of two ways. Either they assume all oils are interchangeable and harmless, or they swing the other direction and become afraid of fat altogether. Neither extreme serves you well. What matters is understanding the specific mechanisms at play so you can make informed choices instead of fearful ones. So let's talk about what's actually happening at a biological level, because once you understand the mechanism, the picture becomes much clearer. One of the central issues involves what happens to oil when it's heated, especially when it's heated repeatedly or to very high temperatures, as happens with deep frying or reusing oil multiple times. When oil is exposed to high heat over and over, its molecular structure begins to break down. This process generates compounds called aldehydes and other oxidation byproducts. Research in food science has shown that these compounds can promote oxidative stress in the body, meaning they contribute to an excess of unstable molecules that damage cells and tissues if the body isn't able to neutralize them quickly enough. Your kidneys, because they filter such a large volume of blood every single day, are particularly exposed to whatever circulates in that bloodstream, including the byproducts of how we cook. Another piece of this puzzle involves the balance between two types of fatty acids, omega-6 and omega-3. Many common kitchen oils, particularly heavily refined seed oils like corn, soybean, sunflower, and some vegetable oil blends, are very high in omega-6 fatty acids. In moderation and in balance with omega-3s, omega-6 fats are a normal and necessary part of the diet. The challenge is that the modern diet, especially diets built around packaged and fried foods, often delivers omega-6 fats in much greater proportion than omega-3 fats, creating an imbalance that nutrition researchers have linked to low-grade chronic inflammation throughout the body. Chronic inflammation is one of the quiet threads connecting many age-related conditions, and the kidneys, with their dense network of tiny blood vessels and filtering units called nephrons, are sensitive to this kind of sustained inflammatory pressure over time. Then there's the matter of trans fats, which are still present in some processed oils, particularly partially hydrogenated oils used in certain packaged baked goods, some margarines, and oils that have been repeatedly used for frying in commercial settings. Trans fats have a well-documented relationship with unhealthy cholesterol patterns, increased blood pressure, and vascular stiffness. And because the kidneys rely so heavily on healthy blood vessels to do their filtering work, anything that compromises vascular flexibility over years can indirectly place more strain on kidney tissue. This is part of why cardiovascular health and kidney health are so closely intertwined. Doctors often say that what's good for your heart is good for your kidneys, and the inverse is true as well. It's also worth talking about how these effects tend to show up, because kidney strain is notoriously quiet in its early stages. Unlike a headache or a stomachache, declining kidney function often produces no obvious symptoms until a fair amount of capacity has already been lost. This is part of why so many people are caught off guard by a blood test result. When symptoms do eventually appear, they can include persistent fatigue, swelling in the ankles or hands, changes in urination patterns, difficulty concentrating, or unexplained changes in blood pressure. None of these symptoms point definitively to cooking oil as a cause, and that's an important distinction to hold on to. Kidney health is influenced by many factors working together, including genetics, blood sugar regulation, blood pressure, hydration, certain medications, and overall dietary pattern. Cooking oil is one thread in a much larger fabric, not a singular villain. But it is a thread you have real control over, every single day, multiple times a day, which makes it worth paying attention to. So what does practical, doctor-recommended guidance actually look like here? The first principle is freshness and stability. Oils that are more resistant to breaking down under heat, such as olive oil, avocado oil, and certain stable cooking fats, tend to produce fewer harmful byproducts when used for everyday cooking. Extra virgin. Olive oil in particular has been studied extensively and is associated with favorable effects on inflammation and vascular health, largely due to its antioxidant content and its fatty acid profile. This doesn't mean every other oil needs to be eliminated. It means thinking about which oil suits which task. A robust oil like olive oil works beautifully for most stovetop cooking, while reserving very high heat frying for occasional use rather than a daily habit. The second principle is simple but easy to overlook. Never reuse oil that has already been used for frying, especially not multiple times. Each reheating cycle increases the concentration of those harmful breakdown compounds we talked about earlier. If a recipe calls for deep frying, using fresh oil and discarding it afterward, rather than storing and reusing it, makes a meaningful difference. The third principle involves balance rather than elimination. Incorporating more omega-3 rich foods into your week, such as fatty fish, walnuts, chia seeds, or flaxseed, helps counterbalance the omega-6 load that's common in a typical modern diet, supporting a more favorable inflammatory balance overall. Hydration deserves a mention here too, because it works hand in hand with everything else. The kidneys need adequate fluid to do their filtering work efficiently, and many older adults unintentionally drink less water than they need, sometimes because thirst signals become less reliable with age. Pairing mindful oil choices with consistent hydration throughout the day gives your kidneys two forms of support at once. And of course, if you have an existing kidney condition, high blood pressure, or diabetes, These dietary adjustments should always be discussed with your physician, who can tailor recommendations to your specific lab values and health history. A simple blood test measuring kidney function, often part of routine blood work, is one of the most valuable tools available for catching changes early, long before symptoms would ever appear on their own. What I want you to take away from all of this isn't fear, it's clarity. Your kidneys have carried you faithfully for decades, filtering, balancing, and protecting you in ways you've likely never had to think about. They deserve a little thoughtfulness in return, not panic, not an overhaul of everything in your pantry overnight, but small, sustainable choices made consistently over time. Choosing a more stable cooking oil, avoiding reused frying oil, adding a bit more omega-3 to your week, and staying mindful of hydration are all gentle, manageable steps. None of them require perfection. They simply require awareness. And awareness is something you've already taken the first step toward simply by spending this time learning. Aging well isn't about chasing every headline or fearing every ingredient in your kitchen. It's about understanding your body a little more deeply each year and making choices that honor the organs working quietly on your behalf. If something in this conversation resonated with you, consider it a gentle nudge, not toward worry, but toward the next conversation with your doctor, the next lab test, the next small swap in your kitchen. Your health in your 70s and 80s is being shaped by the habits you build today. And that's genuinely good news, because it means you still hold real influence over how this story unfolds. Take care of yourself, be patient with the process, and know that even small, steady changes can make a meaningful difference over time.